You are listening to Lovely Talks Heavy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lovely Talks Heavy. I am your host, Lovely, and I discuss everything I enjoy with regard to heavy music. First off, I must apologize about the lack of an episode last week. My schedule at work was so filled up that I barely had a moment for rest for myself, let alone to work on this podcast and, use my brain. That makes sense in my head. Anyway, I am back though, and so I hope you can forgive me. That said, let's get into the episode. Today is a playlist episode, and it's a heavy playlist about everybody's favorite things: torture, execution, and capital punishment. Okay, maybe not so much, but considering that metal is a genre that often prides itself in how brutal and gruesome it can get in the lyrical content and the music videos and the album covers, I figured why not compile together a playlist of songs all about torture and capital punishment. These songs in this playlist of torture range from hypotheticals to historical retelling, and we'll get an interesting look at the methods of torture and capital punishment that these songs are about. To define this, we're talking about violent methods of punishment asserted usually from a ruling class onto a lower class of some sort, though it may not always be the case. I feel like I have to put a Jackass-style warning here before we begin. Obviously, don't try this shit at home. We're just looking at interesting historical stuff here, and I just wanted to compile a list of songs that I think not many people have done before. You've got your all your songs about love, and songs about death and dying and wanting to die, and top 10 Metallica songs, and every listicle that Loudwire has done to hell and back. So I thought this would be a particularly interesting thing to look at, and we're not gonna go and order murder kits off an infomercial and try this on anybody, okay? Alright. Trigger warning and spoiler alert, obviously, I'm going to be discussing some gruesome stuff and methods of torture in this episode, so if you can't stomach that, feel free to skip this episode. I'm cool with that. Okay, with that little introduction out of the way, let's dive right into these methods of torture. Here we start with the impetus behind the playlist. I was listening to Blood Eagle by Amon Amarth off the album Deceiver of the Gods and thought, I bet there's plenty of other songs out there about torture and capital punishment and execution, etc., etc. But first, let's get into the Blood Eagle method of execution. It was mentioned in the saga's stories about Nordic and Germanic history. The Blood Eagle killing method is only mentioned twice in these stories. Both times were executions of noblemen as revenge for murder of someone's father. This method of execution involves carving into the victim's back, cracking their ribs from their spine, and pulling their lungs through the opening and spreading them open like eagle's wings. In the Orkneyinga saga, the Blood Eagle is described as a sacrifice to Odin. The Tale of Ragnar's Sons describes the act of blood eagling as an act of vengeance, where Ivar the Boneless forces Aela of Northumbria to suffer to suffer this execution for the murder of his father Ragnar. However, it seems that there is some debate around whether this method of execution was an actual thing. There are no contemporary accounts recalling this method, for one. For two, the use of the Blood Eagle might have been a literary invention instead of an actual method of execution asserted on any real people. Translation of old text is also a factor, as modern language has long evolved since the sagas first came about. However, that doesn't stop Amon Amarth from crafting a killer tune inspired by the gruesome possible practice. The song opens up with gory sounds of someone getting stabbed, their bones cracked, and struggling for breath. Lyrically, it describes the motions of and motions behind the Blood Eagle. Carved upon your naked back, Blood Eagle. Skinned alive, your ribs are cracked, Blood Eagle. Still alive, you gasp for air as panic stripes your eyes they stare, terror grips your dying heart, a Blood Eagle. What really makes it kind of just funny to me is that the song is fucking catchy as hell. I'll catch myself often, just as I'm washing dishes, just dancing a little bit to myself, nodding my head along, listening to the song about a gruesome execution. Blood Eagle by Amon Amarth, everybody. I still have not forgiven Lordy for their crimes, but I did want to include a little guilty pleasure song into this digital mixtape, and that's How to Slice a Whore off the album Scare Force 1. The song isn't particularly about a method of execution, but it is about violent torture and punishment, so I wanted to include it here anyways. So, the song How to Slice a Whore is the song of a man ordering a step-by-step dissection kit off an infomercial to murder punish his wife or girlfriend because he's, at the song goes, pissed off at his bitch. The song describes the different things he can do: scoop out her eyes, carve out her lips, gut her, etc., etc. The song goes on, though. So enjoy today, because you will get caught. But that's A-okay, because now that whore is gone. 10987, etc., etc. Because it's an acknowledgement that murder is a crime, and this is set in a modern age, where just as easily as one could hypothetically purchase a murder punishment kit from an infomercial, they're also just as easily gonna, as the song says, get caught. The difference between this song and the rest of the songs on this playlist is that it definitely isn't a capital punishment from a ruling class onto a lower class, but in fact just petty punishment from an angry dude to his wife or girlfriend. This is most likely something of pure fantasy, wishing that he could just easily buy a kit with all the tools he might, quote, need to punish his wife or girlfriend. Whatever her supposed crime was, it doesn't merit this kind of reaction. Yeah, she's called a whore several times in the song, and there's lyrics about seeing other guys and lying and stuff, but like, was she? Or is this dude just big mad that she was like talking to a coworker or a friend or something? And even if she was cheating or whatever, you really gotta go that far? Just like, dude, break up, get a divorce, it's fine. Move on. You can clearly see where my guilty pleasure lies in the song now, right? We all know about this method, probably. Crucifixion. A method that involves one getting affixed to a cruz, or a cross, as they say in the Spanish language. Though, apparently, commonly, it was more like a pole. This one's gruesome, lads. We know this. How in the hell can so many Christians feel comfortable having the image of a naked dude bleeding out his ankles and hands in their homes and on their jewelry? It's beyond me. This method of torture was a combination of public humiliation and getting hurt physically in the body. Get your wrists and ankles nailed right into that cross right after some good old flagellation, maybe. Obviously, we might talk about crucifixion in the more Christian sense. That's the first thing we might think of when we hear the word for those of us that were raised with a Christian background of some sense. But in a sexy little song called Crucify or Avenged by Cannibal Corpse, it's way less about that and more about a crucifier going through the motions of torture killing via crucifixion. People of different backgrounds will get a different associative image when I say the words Catherine Wheel. If you're into Gothic architecture, you might think of those big circular windows. If you are a knitter, you might think of a certain type of crochet stitch. If you like fireworks, you might think of that firework, especially if you're from Malta. If you like 90s music, you might think of a band called Catherine Wheel. We're not talking about the band in this section, though. But of course, if we're talking about the torture method here, it's kind of similar to crucifixion with a few different steps. Commonly known as the breaking wheel, the term Catherine wheel didn't arise until St. Catherine of Alexandria was sentenced to be executed by the wheel, and allegedly when she put her hands on it, it just fucking fell to pieces. This was a method that was performed in acts like a Shakespeare play. If you were convicted as a murderer or a robber, then you would be wheeled or executed by the wheel. Since this is as much a method of public humiliation as it is torture and killicide, the victim would be tied down on a public stage with no hope to escape the wheel. Act 1 of this little novella I like to call The Suffering of the Catherine Wheel would involve agonizing mutilation of the body. From toe to tip, their bones would be broken with this wheel. If the punishers were looking to make a quick execution, they would make with a coup de grace right then and there. That's killing or decapitation, It's just like, hey, the Jeopardy's on at 7. We gotta go, man. No, that's so dumb. Though, If we're looking to prolong the torture and humiliation, then we go on to Act 2, which involves threading the victim's broken up limbs into the spokes of a wheel, different from the one that just crushed up their bones. Sometimes they would just be tied up to the wheel though, but ultimately the wheel would be erected onto a mast. Act 3, if we're still feeling horny for some torture, we might decapitate the victim. We might burn a fire under the wheel for some added heat torture, or we might just throw the whole kit and caboodle in the fire and watch the motherfucker burn. Sometimes, though, they would just be left on that wheel for days if they managed to survive Act 1 and 2 of the torture. Then scavengers would just come along and eat up their rotting bodies. If you enjoyed this gruesome detail of this torture method, then you might enjoy a song inspired by it, Catherine Wheel, by him, off the album Screamworks Love in Theory and in Practice. The Catherine is with a K there, by the way, because we're kind of edgy. It's him, so it's less about, how brutal and gruesome the torture method is, and more so using the Catherine Wheel as a metaphor for how being in love can feel like torture sometimes. Maybe it's him. Just throw a fucking dart at their discography. It's gonna be about love, dude. If you find that you don't like having a head anymore, I think you might find the guillotine an equitable solution for your ailment. Don't. Please don't do that. You're probably already familiar with this method, but I'll just briefly define here anyways. The guillotine was long used for beheading, well known for its use in the French Revolution after Louis XVI banned the use of the breaking wheel, and the purpose of capital punishment was redefined to just end life and not inflict pain. There are a good handful of songs about the guillotine in this playlist, and this method of execution is outlined pretty simply in Triumph of the Guillotine by Vulture off the album The Guillotine. A prisoner is easily convicted for his crimes, led through a procession of people who are also condemned to execution, and then down goes the blade and he dies under the guillotine. As I was researching for the song, I came across something interesting. There is actually a painting attributed to artist Nicolas Antoine Taunet called Triumph of the Guillotine in Hell, very inspired by the French Revolution, and I find it very likely that this piece of art was at least some of the inspiration behind the album title, The Guillotine, and the song name, The Triumph of the Guillotine, and of the album artwork of somebody about to be executed as the blade of the guillotine falls onto them. One more fun fact before we get to the last one, lads. Did you know that the last legal use of the guillotine was in the 1970s? All things considered with the rest of these methods discussed in this episode, that's pretty recent. Damn. The Iron Maiden is a bit of a myth, it seems. It's an iron cabinet with spikes on the inside made for poking, and a little bit stuff beyond that. While there have been Iron Maidens out in display in museums and alluded to in literature, it might have been a made-up thing. Well, everything is made up, yes, until it's, made reality. But the history of the Iron Maiden, as asserted by Johann Philipps Siebengeus, I did not pronounce that right, was first used to execute a coin forger. This might not be true, however. Regardless, though, this inspired the name of a song in a band that we all know and love very much, Iron Maiden. Bye, Iron Maiden. That's gonna do it for this torture, kill, murder, punishment episode of Lovely Talks Heavy. If you enjoyed that, subscribe to me on Mixcloud and YouTube. I'm Lovely Metalhead. Follow me on social media and interact with me a little bit, maybe. I need some friends on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram. I'm Lovely Metalhead on there also. If you want to leave feedback for me to read aloud on the show, the email to go to is lthfeedback@protonmail.com. If you would like to extend your support beyond following me and sharing the show with a friend, I've got a Ko-fi page. Drop a few dollars over at kofi.com/lovelymetalhead. If you can't donate, that's completely okay, my friends. I understand. Before I sign off, I just want to wish a happy belated birthday to Devin, who listens to the show and has just been super kind and really cool. So, until next week, next Saturday, the next episode of Lovely Talks Heavy. You stay brutal, my friends. Goodbye.